Today we're going to be learning Yevamot Daf Nun Vav. Today's daf is sponsored by David and Mitzi Geffen in loving memory of David's father, Dr. Abraham Geffen, on his yurt site. And today's daf is also sponsored in memory of Rav Aaron Lichtenstein Satzal, who I was zocha to learn Gemara with for a few years. Okay, we're going to get started at the top of the page, Nun Vav Amud Aleph. Okay, just to repeat the Mishna, to review where we were up to. Part of the complication of this Mishna is that there's a lot of different things mentioned, and it's not clear what everything is referring to, and that's going to be a little bit of our discussion today. So it says, okay, right? No matter how, and this is all derived from the Torah law, it doesn't matter in what way, whether he was forced into it, she was forced into it. Okay, by the way, onus here, we've talked about, doesn't necessarily mean rape, right? It could be he was forced by someone, put a gun to his head and said, have relations with this woman or something like that. Likewise for her, right? It could be not exactly the way we normally view rape, but it was a forced incident, okay? Then it continued, right? Now, we haven't finished the sentence yet. It said, and this is going to be important, whether it's shogeg, mezid, ones, ratzon. By the way, there's a whole discussion. What's the difference between mezid and ratzon? Mezid is intentional and ratzon is with your own will. What's the difference? Okay, there's a debate about why these are two different things. Some people say mezid means you intended to do the act of having relations, but you didn't necessarily intend it for the mitzvah, whereas maybe ratzon was you did the mitzvah willingly. Debate what exactly it is. And then even if he's shogeg, he mezid, hu mezid, he shogeg, right? It seems clear either which way. Right? We even saw, even if both are anusim, we saw Rabbi Chia added to this. Then it says, we're still mid-sentence. We haven't yet said what happens, right? What is the law? It just says, one who did this, that, blah, 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 blah. Then, if it's just the beginning of sexual relations, or or he finishes, kana. It's acquired. Okay? So now that means she becomes his wife. Okay? Now, the question is, what does this word kana mean? Okay, and there's going to be a debate, Rav and Shmuel. Is she his wife fully in all these cases? And we're going to have a machloket. We're going to say that some of these cases, and then the question becomes, it's not clear which of these cases, okay, there's a debate about which cases we're referring to, but we're going to give it a term called bi'a gru'a. Okay, it's like chalitza psula. Remember we said you can have a chalitza that's a weak chalitza because it was done after a get was given. Likewise here, we're going to have an act of sexual relations between them that is not a full act. Like, for example, shogeg, right? They did it unwittingly. He didn't even know it was her that he was supposed to do yibum with or something. That already makes it a weakened act. So the question is, when it says kana, does it mean kana entirely in a case like that or only partially? Some people think that our machloket here between Rav and Shmuel we're going to discuss, is it a partial kinyan or a full kinyan, is talking about a case like shogeg or onus. Okay. Some people say it even includes ha'ara'ah. This is a debate about whether you think ha'ara'ah is considered at the beginning, initial stages of intercourse, which we had all debate yesterday, what exactly that is. Is it considered like a full act, and therefore that would be complete, and no one would debate that? And the debate is really about shogeg or onus. Or does this debate include that as well? Okay, is that also called a bit of a bi'a gru'a? Okay, that's a side debate of the Rishonim about this sugya. But let's deal with the simple reading of the sugya. So, and that's what's the motive? I'll just give you an example as to why, or a proof text as to why you would think it is relating to hara'ah, because look at the words the Gemara quoted from the Mishna. Echad ma'areh, echad gomer kana. So to those who say this isn't talking about hara'ah, it's a little bit difficult. This seems to be saying we're talking specifically about hara'ah. Why else would the Gemara mention it right here, right, as the intro sentence? Some people say no, because they were just trying to get to the word kana, which, as I showed you before, relates to everything mentioned until this point in the Mishnah. And therefore, the real word they wanted to get to was kana, but they didn't want to quote just one word. They wanted you to see it in context. So they wrote echad gomel kana, but really they're referring to much earlier in the Mishnah, shogeg, onus. We've seen before, by the way, that the words they always quote here aren't always the direct words that they're referring to. So that's a bit of a side debate. So my kana, now let's get into the sugya. Rav Amar kana lekol, u'Shmuel Amar. Okay, so Rav says it's a complete kinyan. Okay, it's a full yibum, everything included. Shmuel Amar lo kana ela ledvarim hamurim b'parasha. Only the things directly stated in the yibum parsha, like He inherits his brother. Yibum, and to exempt her from yibum, meaning, let's say he divorces her tomorrow, she doesn't need chalitza. Her mitzvah of yibum is done, even though it was only a bi'ah gru'ah, as we say, right? A weekend, a not so good bi'ah, because let's just use for the case that everyone agrees about, like a case of shogeg, okay, where he didn't even realize he was doing it, or she didn't realize, and right, that would work. So according to Shmuel, what doesn't it work for? So the main thing it doesn't work for is eating truma. She can't eat truma now because truma is only allowed with a bi'ah, a good bi'ah. Okay, and this wasn't a good act of intercourse. So therefore, she's not allowed to eat truma. So let's say, what does that mean? What case? Let's say the brother was a kohen. She ate truma when she married the brother, right? She's a daughter of a Yisrael. The way it works is you get married. Okay, actually, it works when you get engaged. By Torah law, you can already, a betrothal, you can already eat truma. But the rabbis came and said, no. At betrothal, you can't eat truma because two possible reasons for the gzera. One is the assumption was once you're betrothed, you go back to your parents' house. You don't move into your husband's house, not until you're married. If that's the case, we're worried if we let you eat truma, what's going to happen? You're going to bring your truma food home and your family is going to eat from truma food and they're not allowed to. That's a real big serious avera. You could get the death penalty, right? Death by the hands of God, not the death penalty in court, but God, it says you die if you eat it. So we certainly don't want that to happen, so therefore we don't allow it. Number two reason is a bit of a not as pleasant one, which is maybe he'll decide he doesn't want to marry her in the end. He'll find, it's called mishum simpon, which is maybe he'll find something despicable about her. He won't want to marry her. And then turns out, right, we only really allow her when she's betrothed because she's going to eventually be married to him. But if there's a chance that she won't actually end up being married to him, and then let's say she doesn't, and that's a small chance always, they won't go through with the marriage. They won't go through with the marriage. Turns out she never really was allowed. And she was a zar who ate, or a zara, a stranger, right, who ate truma, a non-kohen. So therefore we avoid it at betrothal time. But you have to remember this, and we'll see this why it's important later. On a Torah level, she really could eat truma once she's engaged. But again, we're talking right now not about a Yevamot. We're just talking about a regular woman, the regular laws of truma. Torah level she could, but the rabbis forbade it. They permitted it once she marries him. When he dies, she can't eat truma anymore unless she has sons, okay? Because she basically goes back to her father's house. If she has sons, I actually can't remember if it's also daughters. I think it's just any children. Then she's considered still part of her husband's household. And then she can continue to eat truma. Okay, we'll see later what if the child dies, okay? We'll get back to that later. But now, so if the husband dies, now in this case, the husband died childless. That's the whole reason why we have yibum. So she's not allowed to eat truma anymore. But once she does yibum, she becomes, if the brother was a kohen, the other brother's also, right? If her first husband was kohen, his brother, who's always through the father, who you do yibum with, is obviously a kohen. So when she does yibum, she can eat truma. So comes Shmuel and says, not if she did yibum in a weakened manner, then it's not going to work. Not until she fully consummates the yibum relationship. So now, that's okay. This is the first version. We're going to have a bunch of things today that come in two versions. And then the structure is going to be the same, where we're going to bring, we have a machloket Rav and Shmuel. We're going to bring a statement of Shmuel's, which is going to work in one way, right? Some other statement he said. In this version, we're going to connect it and say, oh, Shmuel's consistent within his opinion. When we have the second reading, we're going to say, oh, Shmuel contradicts himself. Then we're going to bring a braita that is going to, in both cases, is going to raise a question on Shmuel, but in a bit of a different way each time. So let's move on. So Rav Amar Ochelet, why did Rav say she can eat truma? I skipped a few lines. Okay, so again, my kana, Rav says kana completely. Shmuel says the kana in the Mishna just means partially, okay, not for truma. So min anisu, and now we're going to try to understand this machlok. Min anisu in l'divrei hakol achla. If she was married to the first husband, which means she was then permitted to eat truma in his lifetime, then he died childless. Divrei hakol achla, dahakava achla meikara. Since she was allowed to eat truma with the first husband, so as soon as she does even some small bi'ah, right, a non-significant one, not significant enough, that's enough, even according to Shmuel, to keep her eating truma. So now we're going to learn that it's not that what we thought, but if she was actually married to the first husband, then when she does this bi'ah gru'ah, let's say bi'ah b'shogeg, she's allowed to eat truma. Ki pligim in a erusim. The machloket is from engagement, betrothal. Rav Amal ochelet, harabe rachmana biat shogeg kimezid. He says, look, we had this drasha. The Torah said, right from the drasha, we got to the fact the Torah says, whether it's shogeg, whether it's mezid, it's all the same, which means it's all the same. If a full bi'ah, b'mezid, intentional, would allow her to eat truma, even though she couldn't eat truma with the first husband, because now she's full, right? She was betrothed to the first husband, but now she's fully married to the yibum, because yibum is the fulfillment of a marriage relationship. So even b'shogeg, it will be the same as mezid, and yes, she can. Shmuel Amar, no, ki Rabbi Rachmana, when the Torah said, and the rabbis understood that the Torah said, bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid, what they meant was to say, even unwittingly, but they only said, if he's fulfilling the place of his brother, well, then this weakened bi'ah, which is done b'shogeg, is only going to allow him to have the exact same koach, power that the first husband had. If the first husband didn't enable her to eat truma, then this yibum, this weakened bi'ah, is not going to help her. Okay? So he can't be any stronger than the first husband was. Again, once he does complete bi'ah and with intention and all that, then she'll be his full wife for the intent, for purposes of truma as well. But at this stage, that he only did it b'shogeg, it wouldn't work. So now they're going to say, that's an explanation of the first explanation of their machlok. Now we're going to say, as the Shmuel, Shmuel is consistent with him, what he says. The Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, elsewhere he said, Rav Nachman quoted Shmuel as saying, Kol shehabal ma'achil, yabam ma'achil, v'kol she'ein habal ma'achil, yabam eino ma'achil. If the husband could feed her, meaning could give her truma, then the yabam can. And if the baal can't, then the yabam can't. Now, the important words are missing from here. Sometimes this happens in the Gemara. They mean the yabam can't if it's a bi'ah grua, right? Only if yibum wasn't performed properly, because obviously if she was engaged to the first husband and she does a complete marriage to the yabam, then, which means just having a complete appropriate right in all done properly with intention, intercourse, then she will be his full wife. And of course she can eat truma. But here we mean with a bi'ah grua, the yabam has no more power than the husband had. Okay, so that's Shmuel is consistent. Now we're going to bring a beitive, as I told you. We're going to bring a braita that disagrees with Shmuel. Bat Yisrael pikachat, shenitarsa lekohen pikach. So you have the daughter of an Israelite, which can't eat truma. She gets betrothed to a kohen pikach. Right? Pikach just means they're of sound mind. Now, at this point, she can't eat truma, because we said the rabbis made a gzerah, no truma until you're married. He didn't manage to marry her until ad she became deaf, and we mean here a deaf mute. Okay, going back to chagiga, where deaf is not someone who doesn't have da'at, only if they're a deaf mute. So a deaf mute is considered someone without da'at. That means when he married her, the marriage doesn't have validity on a Torah level, and therefore he can't permit her to eat truma. Okay, so eina ochelet. If he only managed to marry her and he had already become a deaf mute at that point, he doesn't have that. His marriage is only on a rabbinic level. That won't now permit her to eat truma. Mate, what if he dies after? In other words, he married her when he was deaf. She couldn't eat truma. He dies, childless. And now she falls to a yabam who's deaf. Now, what do we learn? Yibum can happen even b'shogeg. You clearly don't need intent, right? So if he doesn't have dad, it shouldn't matter. And that's what the braita says. If she falls l'fnei abam cheresh, ochelet, it's a perfectly legitimate marriage and she can now eat truma. So it's this crazy thing, which is what the braita points out. The yabam has more strength than the husband does. The husband wasn't allowed to get her to eat truma, but the yabam, even with a bi'ah grua, because he's deaf, and therefore we're assuming it doesn't come with dad, therefore, the koach hayabam is more than the koach haba. Okay? So, Bishlam al-Rav, to Rav, this makes perfect sense, because he said, bi'ah b'shogeg, right, is complete, and she can eat truma. But, l'shmuel, kasha, to Shmuel, this doesn't make any sense, because Shmuel said the yabam has no more power than the husband did, and shouldn't be allowed to allow her to eat truma. So, Shmuel's going to reread this braita. Amar l'cha Shmuel, emahachi, read the braita like this. Lo speak lekansa ad shenitcharesh. Again, if he didn't manage to marry her until he became a deaf mute, eina ochelet betruma. She cannot eat truma. Kanas What if he married her fully? She was allowed to eat truma, and then he became deaf. So of course, ochelet, because the moment of marriage is when it's significant. Mate, if he dies after that, v'nafla lifnei yabam cheresh, and then she falls in front of a deaf mute yabam, ochelet, that union can allow her to continue to eat truma if she was already eating truma before. This removes the question on Shmuel, because according to Shmuel, right, as long as she was allowed to eat truma from the first husband, she'll be allowed to eat truma from the second husband, even if he's cheresh. So that's okay. Now, what doesn't make sense according to Shmuel? My bizo. The whole braita said at the end, the punchline was, this is how you see the Yabam has more strength than the husband himself, because the husband himself couldn't allow her to eat and the Yabam did. According to this, that's not true. According to Shmuel's reading, the Yabam had the exact same koch, right? The Yabam only was allowed to allow her to eat truma because the husband had allowed her, because it was before he became deaf. So what does it mean, bezo? In this way, the Yabam has more strength than the Baal. So they say it like this. De'ilu Baal cheresh me'ikara lo ochelet, ve'ilu Yabam cheresh me'ikara achla. The difference is the first case to the last case. A husband who's cheresh from the beginning, he's a deaf mute from the get-go, can never permit her to eat truma. But a Yabam cheresh, when he does yibum from the beginning, right, his first act with her is yibum, that permits her to eat truma. Now, only if the husband had already allowed her to eat truma, and she was in the parsha of truma, right, in the notion of truma. Not if she wasn't, but it shows that a Yabam cheresh works with his first action on the woman, can work, even though he doesn't have that. Whereas a husband if he's cheresh before he marries her, that's not going to work. So that's how we compare them, not the way we thought to compare them, and that's how Shmuel can explain that, right? That's all the first reading. Now we're going to get to a different reading. Again, according to that reading, they're machloket, right? Remember, they all agree that if he was married, she was married to the first husband before, again, we're not talking about deaf now, we're just talking about shogeg. If he was married before to the woman, and then they did yibum, even if it's bi'agla works, the only machloket is in erusin. If they were betrothed and she couldn't eat truma to begin with, then this bi'agla doesn't allow her to eat truma according to Shmuel, and it does according to Rav. But now we're going to have a different way of understanding the machloket. Ika da'amre, mina erusin divrei akolo achla. Even Rav agrees that from betrothal and then bi'agla, she wasn't allowed to eat truma before. And now they do this bi'agla, bi'abashogeg, that's not going to work. Even Rav agrees it doesn't work. So when Rav said kana lekol inyan, he didn't mean if it was from erusin. He only meant if you were doing yibum after she had been married to the first husband already. So let's read it inside. Mina erusin, everyone agrees lo achla. The halo achla b'chayei baal. There's no way that this weakened yibum, right, this weakened bi'ah relation is going to allow her to have more than what she had in the first place. No way. Ki pligi min anisuin. The machloket is if she was married, can this bi'ah enable her to continue, go back to eating truma to her original status? So Rava marochelet hava achla mi'ikara, because she was already eating before. Of course, she could continue to eat. Shmuel amar eina ochelet. Why? Again, for what he said before, ki Rabbi Rachmana bi'at shogeg k'misim b'dvarim amurim b'parsha aval lakom milelo. Even though it's true she was eating truma with the first husband, but then he died. She stopped being able to eat truma. In order to get her back into eating truma, shogeg doesn't work. Shogeg only works for the things mentioned in the parsha of yibum. Notice it never said anything about eating truma in the parsha of yibum. So basically, we're going to say that this only works for those things mentioned, and it doesn't work. So even if she was married, right? Right. So even if she was married and eating truma beforehand, this bi'ah does not enable her to eat truma. So now we're going to go back and do the same thing we did in the previous section, but a little bit different. So now they're going to say, wait a minute. How could you say if she was eating truma with the first husband, the bi'ah should let her continue to eat truma based on what Shmuel says elsewhere? Remember what he said? Hamar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. Shmuel was quoted by Rav Nachman as having said, Kol shehaba'al ma'achil, yabam ma'achil. If the husband was allowed to have her eat truma, then the yabam can continue in that way. So how do we relate to that? That doesn't seem to be what Shmuel's saying at all. Shmuel says, no, it doesn't work. Again, unless there was complete biyah, but we're assuming that that statement was made about incomplete biyah, right? A shogeg or something like that. So Ema changed what Shmuel said here to say, kol biyah shahaba'al ma'achil ba, kol biyah. Notice, any type of intercourse that would normally allow a husband la'achil ba. Now, even though yibum can be done b'shogeg, marriage cannot be done b'shogeg. Marriage has to have intent, okay? Marriage doesn't work b'shogeg. So now we're going to say any intent. Now, the marriage is consummated through intercourse. So only an intercourse that would allow a marriage would allow the marriage to be effective, that then she could eat truma, would be the same required for yibum to permit her to eat truma. That's how he reads it. And then kol bi'ah she'ena yabam achil ba, but if it's a bi'ah that would not have worked to create a marriage relationship because it was, let's say, shogeg, ein hayabam achil ba, that type of interaction would not enable her to eat the truma. And then that makes perfect sense, right? That fits in with what Shmuel just said. Okay, so we're not saying if it was a case where she could have already eaten from the husband, then the yabam can continue that. Not necessarily. What it means is, how do we define what type of intercourse is going to be the one that permits this or not? That's the question. Now we're going to bring this braita again as a meitive. Now the simple reading of this braita matches none of the opinions. So what we're going to say is, now remember, Rav matches what Shmuel said in the previous language. So we're basically going to bring the braita and then say, well, Rav can explain it the way Shmuel explained it in the previous section. But how is Shmuel going to explain it? It's not going to make sense, and you'll see in a minute. Meitiv. Bat Yisrael pikachat, shenitarsa l'kohen pikach. We're basically quoting the exact same braita we saw before. So a daughter of an Israelite who is a full mind, who gets betrothed to a kohen who's a full mind, but then he becomes a deaf mute before the marriage. Eina ochelet, she can't eat truma. Mate, v'nafla lefnei yabam cheresh, he dies, and then she falls to the yabam cheresh, ochelet, v'zo yafeh koach yabam mikoach habam. Now, what did we say right now? Mina nisuin, right? Mina erusin, right? Nobody thinks that she can eat. So now, right, because she wasn't eating in her husband's lifetime. So here she wasn't eating truma, right? How could she? So again, you'd have to say that we're talking about the way we explained it according to Shmuel, that it was a case where he actually married her and could, and then he became deaf, and then she falls to the deaf yabam. And then the point is that when he's deaf, he can do yibum, even though the husband couldn't. But yes, it was a case where she was already eating. And then that only fits because the marriage was good marriage, and only later did he become deaf. And then it fits in perfectly with Rav, but it doesn't fit in with Shmuel at all. Because Shmuel said, no bi'ah grua is going to allow, right? A yabam cheresh can never permit truma, according to him. So this really makes no sense, because it seems very clear that a yabam cheresh could permit truma. Because again, we're just always equating a deaf mute yabam with yabam b'shogeg, because shogeg is almost, right, the same idea. Your mind is not on what you're doing. So bishlam al Rav mitaretz k'mitaretz mikaros. He fits with what Shmuel said in the first language, and therefore we could explain it that way. Elal Shmuel kasha, and in fact the Gemara ends with kasha. This in fact is difficult according to this reading. Tanu Rabbanan, since we're already on this topic of a pikach shenitcheresh, right, someone who originally was of sound mind and then was no longer. So Tanu Rabbanan, let's learn a braita about this. Bat Yisrael pikachat shenitarsa l'kohen pikach, same beginning of the story. V'lo speak l'kansad shenitcheresh, same continuation. He didn't marry her until he became deaf. Eina ochelet, she can't eat truma. Now it sounds like the simple reading of this, she can never eat truma from that husband because, again, the marriage was only rabbinic. That doesn't permit the truma. No lad la ben, but if she has a son, I told you this before, she has a son, ochelet. Before I told it to you with just a regular husband who had died and she had children. But now we see if she ends up with a child with this deaf husband, then she'll be allowed to eat truma, because then through the son, she becomes more part of the family. It's as if it's a little bit weird because we said it had to do with that, but in any case, that's something that adds on an additional that she would then be allowed to. What if meitabin? What if the son dies though? The son was the only thing connecting her to eating truma. So what if the son dies? So Rabbi Natan omer ochelet, chachamim omrim eina ochelet. Okay, Rabbi Natan says she can eat truma still, and which we're going to have to understand why. It doesn't make so much sense. Chachamim makes the most sense. Eina ochelet, because it was only because of him she could eat. Now he dies. No connection anymore. So my time at the Rabbi Natan, we're actually going to bring two explanations and both are going to be rejected. Amar Rabbi. So my time at the Rabbi Natan, what's this reason? So Rabbi explained. Look, she was already came into eating truma, so we leave her in it. So Abaye says, what are you talking about? Amar le Abaye, elameata, bat Yisrael shenisei lekohen umitle teichol shekvar achla. We can use this argument in many other cases, which we don't. So I told you before, if the daughter of an Israelite marries a kohen and then he dies, she goes back to not eating truma. So why wouldn't you say once you already started eating truma, you get to stay like this woman? Doesn't make any sense. Since the husband dies, there's no more kedusha to her, right? She's no longer connected to the truma story. Therefore, achanami, also here, since the son died, she shouldn't be allowed to eat truma. So I don't really accept that as a reason. Ela amar Rav Yosef, kasava Rabbi Natan. It's going to be a little more complicated. Nisu'ei cheresh ma'achilim b'truma. V'lo gazrina nisu'ei cheresh ata kiddushei cheresh. Remember I told you before that really on a doraita level, you could eat truma when you're betrothed. So it's only the Rabbanan that you can't. So since he betrothed her when he was of sane mind, therefore that kind of put her in the parsha of truma. Yes, it's true the rabbi said no, but when he marries her, we're going to now allow it because even though the marriage is only the Rabbanan, but on a doraita level already from the beginning, she was allowed to eat truma. So we're basically going to say she can continue to eat truma. And there's no reason to make a gzera and say we're not going to allow a marriage of a cheresh to allow her to eat truma because maybe you'll think a betrothal of a cheresh will permit her to eat truma when that for sure doesn't work. If he was a cheresh from the beginning, it definitely wouldn't work because that's in general only a marriage on a rabbinic, right? The betrothal is even on a rabbinic level, but Rabbi Natan's going to say we allow this. Now, what's the problem here? It makes sense actually, because again, on a doraita level, since the betrothal was all done according to Torah law, he was not a cheresh at the time. So therefore, we're going to basically say she can eat truma. But what's the problem? The problem is that's not what it says in the braita. Notice, where does Rabbi Natan come in? Only once the son was born. According to this, Rabbi Natan should say even before the son is born, she's allowed to eat truma. So they say Mishum Rabbanan. The reason they brought up the Nolad Laben was to say even the rabbis agree she can eat truma if she has a son. And that's why they brought the Nolad Laben. But that still doesn't work because V'liflog Rabbi Natan alayu bereisha. It should have said from the beginning, right? When it said about Yisrael that does this, right? It should have said Rabbi Natan omer ochelet before you got to the son being born because he thinks it's even allowed then. So then they say, well, Shavik lehula Rabbanan ad Mesayim will tell you. They left the structure. This is just a literary thing. They wanted to get through all of the rabbis and only then say Rabbi Natan. And when Rabbi Natan comes in, he disagrees with everything, which would be very nice, except if you really wanted to leave Rabbi Natan for the end, then again, let's look at the braita. Which we think Rabbi Natan disagrees with. But okay, let's say we're going to get through all of the rabbis and then we'll get to Rabbi Natan. So nolad laben, if she has a son, ochelet, that's the rabbis. Even the rabbis will agree. Meit haben, now it should have said, the rabbis say ena ochelet, and Rabbi Natan says ochelet, and we'll say that ochelet goes back to the whole thing. But instead, Rabbi Natan appears before the rabbis. It says Rabbi Natan omer ochelet, and the rabbis say ena ochelet. And that doesn't really make sense then to say that ochelet goes all the way back to the beginning of the Mishna. So he says your reading doesn't really work with the reading, with the simple reading of the braita. And therefore he rejects his explanation as well. And we're actually left with no good explanation of Rabbi Natan's position. Now we're going back to the Mishnah. Okay, so then we said, right, there's again, the Mishnah talks about Habal Yivito, Shogeg Mezid, Ones Ratzon. Then it talked about Ma'areh, Gomel, all those are Kona. Lo Chilek Ben Bi'ah LeBi'ah, which is Bi'ah Kedarka, Bi'ah Shalo Kedarka. Any of those work. And not only for yibum, we're going to learn from here also. Now, it's not exactly clear what the v'chein is referring to. Is it referring to the ha'ara'ah? Is it referring, we're not exactly sure, but we're going to start with this. Okay, that's going to be part of the issue of our sugi. Amar Rav Amram, ha-milta Amar lam Rav Sheshet. Rav Sheshet told us the following thing. And our eyes were enlightened by our Mishnah, meaning we could prove what he said through our Mishnah. What did he say? Eshet Yisrael shene'ensa. If you have, we've talked about this before. It's one of these very difficult things in halacha to understand. And I think you have to remember that status in society, like where a kohen fits in with the status is, it's right nowadays we give a few kibudim, nice things to a kohen, but theoretically they're no different than anybody else. In those days, they were treated like in a different place in society. And number two, I think their approach to rape was viewed very differently. So if a woman is married to a regular Yisrael, we've already learned, if she intentionally goes and commits adultery, she's not allowed to her original husband and she's not allowed to the person she committed adultery with. But if she gets raped, she can go back to her original husband. But a woman who is married to a kohen is very stuck. If she gets raped, she cannot go back to her original husband because a kohen can't be married to a woman who is raped. Okay, this is a very difficult halacha. I don't have a good explanation for it other than to say that, again, society viewed things differently, and the way the kohen was in society was very different, and there was a certain standard, right? It wasn't, now we're going to see today, there's different approaches to how they view this woman. Okay, did they view her as a zona? Now you have to remember, zona in Torah law is not a prostitute. Okay, a zona, that's the way we define zona. It's not defined in those for them as a prostitute. It's defined as someone who is involved in a forbidden relationship. Okay, so now with that background, we're going to go into this next to Abaye of our daf. Eshet Yisrael shenensa. This is the halacha Rav Sheshet said, and then we're going to try to prove it from our Mishna. In the end, we're not going to be able to. A woman who's married to an Israelite that was raped, even though she can go back to her original husband, as I said, psula l'kiuna. If he dies or divorces her and she wants to marry a kohen, she can't. Because again, this woman is defined as a zona. Now, not everybody's going to agree with this, but that's Rav Sheshet. He thinks she's defined as a zona, and it says in the Torah, zona can't marry a kohen. Again, zona does not mean she was a prostitute. Nobody thinks she was a prostitute. But I would say it in the English, it works better. I couldn't come up with the word in Hebrew, but defiled, right? Like truma, she was hutamah. We're going to see this later in the verse. Hutamah in Hebrew usually means impurity, but what it really means is she was defiled because her body was defiled by somebody else, and that means she can no longer be married to a kohen. So even if she wasn't married to a kohen at the time, it means she's disqualified for kehuna. V'tana tuna, and the Tana of our Mishnah says that as well. Because it says, V'chein habal kol ha'marayot hamurot b'Torah, which included ones, right? And it's all these things, or psulot, right? If it happened with a psula, in other words, if she was in an honest relationship, which was mentioned in the beginning of the Mishnah, then the this would apply as well to those who are psulot with kehuna. But having had that onus would make her defiled to a kohen. So the Gemara says, no, the v'chein is not referring to the onus. My v'chein, my lav, loshna b'shogeg, loshna b'meziv, loshna b'onus, loshna b'ratzon. The katane, psala. In other words, first they say, isn't it referring to that first line? And then it's saying she's disqualified for kehuna, and that would prove Rav Sheshet. Say no. My v'chein, ahara'ah. It's to say, if there was only the initial acts of intercourse, that would make her, like, let's say, a grusha, or let's say an almana with a kohen gadol, starts to have the initial acts of intercourse and then stops, that would already make her psula l'kuna. Okay, hara. Okay, say, wait, hara deman. Ilema de arayot. If we're talking about any arayot, right? Let's say she did hara with her father, and then that would defile her for the kuna. And that's what the Mishna is telling us. Now, remember, that means we have the halacha by yibum. We're learning from there to arayot, but we already learned. What you're going to learn arayot from yibum about hara. Remember where the whole source of hara came up from the arayot. It would be the opposite. Adraba. So you can't say the Mishna is saying, we learn it's true for yibum, and now we're going to say, and it's true for the arayot as well. No, it's true for the arayot, and then we learn from there to yibum. So that can't be. The main place we learned it was there. So v'chein maybe means something else. It's referring to, again, we tried to say it's referring to, this is why I said the Mishna has different parts. Is it referring to the onus part? No, we said no. It must be referring to hara. Can't be referring to hara. So what is it referring to? Well, it can be referring to the shelo kedarka. Shelo kedarka da arayot. Okay, so again, the v'chein is just like by yibum. Shelo kedarka is going to be koneh v'yevama. Likewise, in arayot, if you do via shelo kedarka, anal intercourse, then that's going to be to oraita, you did something wrong, you're going to get the punishment. So they say, what are you talking about? Again, adraba, if you're going to say it shelo kedarka varayot, ikar mishkavei isha barayot k'tiv. Again, where do they learn that there's biash kedarka and shelo kedarka, that both are forbidden in the same way? Because when it talks about mishkav zachor, homosexual relations, it says Mishkevei Isha, if they do it like Mishkevei Isha, which includes both types, because it's plural. So there, ba'arayot k'tiv. The main source is an arayot. So again, you can't say we're going to learn from yibum to arayot when the main source is an arayot. Ela mai v'chein, asher lo kedarka d'chai v'elav. But we are going to have a final answer. V'chein is not referring to ones, in which case it doesn't prove Rav Sheshet. The v'chein is just like bia shelo kedarka could work to create this yibum relationship, right? That they fulfill the mitzvah of yibum through that. Likewise, in chai ve'lavim, now the proof by Mishkevei Isha was in the chai ve'kritut, but where it's karet. But if it's a negative prohibition, that we're going to learn that even in the negative prohibitions, like a kohen to a grusha or something like that, you will be liable if, or a mamzer to a Yisrael or something like that, then you will also be liable if you did it shelo kedarka. And that's what we learn from the word b'chein, and therefore it doesn't prove Rav Sheshet at all. Now we're going to have, again, two versions and a mirror image of the sugya. Amal Raba, it says Raba, it should be Raba. Eshet kohen sheden. So now we get to the Eshet kohen. Ba'ala, so a woman who's married to a kohen gets raped. Ba'ala loke alea mishum zona. If her husband goes back and has relations with her, which he's not allowed to do by Torah law, he gets lashes because of a zona. This would fit in with what we said before, that she is considered a zona. Again, no one thinks she's a prostitute, right? This is the term zona in the Torah, and its definition is someone who was in a relationship with somebody else, right? So to speak. So now they're going to say mishum zona im mishum tum'ah lo. It sounds like just mishum zona, but not because of tum'ah. Now, what did I say before? Tum'ah is like defilement. Now, where does this come up? The tum'ah is used as defilement in the sota. The sota says, and also not only that, but when you're forbidden to a man is forbidden to remarry his divorcee if she was married to someone in between. And it says, because she was tum'ah, right? She was hutma'ah. She became defiled in between. She was with somebody else that already doesn't allow him to marry her again. So here you see this defilement, right? That she's with some other man puts her in a different state. So now, right, that's in that case, it's if she marries someone. Anyway, mishum tum'ah lo. So why wouldn't you get lashes for also being with this woman who was defiled? Ema af mishum zona. You get lashes for zona and you get lashes for this defilement. So Mativ Rabbi Zera says, wait a minute, I'm going to question you from this source. By the sota, it says vihi lo nitpasa asura, which means she wasn't grabbed, she wasn't forced into it. She's not forced into it, then she's forbidden. Okay, meaning she's a sota. But what do you infer from there? Ha nitpasa, if she was forced into it, she was raped, for example. Muteret, she'd be permitted, right? She's not a sota if she was forced. Nobody says that. Now they say, wait, but there's a drasha on this pasuk in this braita. But there is yesh lacha acheret she'af al pi shenitpasa asura ve'ezo zo eshet kohen. But there is one woman that even though she was forced into it, she's still going to be considered defiled, and that's the wife of a kohen. Now, why is this a contradiction? It's saying exactly the same thing. However, we just said a minute ago that you get lashes for it. He says, if you're learning it from this verse, hilo nitpasa, she wasn't forced. And then if she was forced, it wouldn't be sota. But if she was married to a kohen, it would. Well, right, she's not exactly a sota, but she can't be married to him anymore. That's a lav haba michlal aseh. And it's lav haba michlal aseh is like an aseh. Now, it's not exactly a positive commandment, but there's no place where it says, do not marry her here. There's no lashes, right? Lashes have to come from where it says, do not do this. This is derived from some positive statement. So it's not a positive mitzvah, but it's a positive statement. That can't have the status of a lo taseh that you get lashes for. So, Amar Raba, hakol hayu bichlal zona. Really, it was all learned out from the zona. Okay, both the zona and the tum'ah. Okay, both lashes for tum'ah and zona. And that's what he's basically saying is we don't really learn it out from the hilo nitpasa. It's really learned out from the isur if they can't marry a zona. When it said by Eshet Yisrael v'hilo nitpasa asura ha nitpasa muteret, right? From there you learn that we're going to exclude reading. Even Eshet Yisrael theoretically should have been forbidden to her husband, but when it says v'hilo nitpasa, we take out the Eshet Yisrael from the picture. And therefore, ha nitpasa would be muteret if she was forced. Michlal, the Eshet Kohen can be kaima, but the Eshet Kohen is back in her original isur from the beginning, meaning we didn't learn it from the sota psukim. So therefore, it's not an aseh; it's actually a lo taseh that comes from the lo taseh of zona. there's a bit of a problem with this explanation I don't have a good answer to, which is in the end, we're saying we learn it out from the zona, yet we're saying there's two sets of lashes, one for zona, one for truma. So I don't have a good answer for that. We seem to say anyway, it would be two sets of lashes. But now we have a different version of Rab. This is the opposite. He didn't come and say she's a zona. He said she was defiled. That's not the same as saying she's a zona. She was defiled. You're going to like this one better because he's not saying she was a zona. It was just that something happened to her that's now going to prohibit her from going to the kohen. So they say, mishum tuma in, mishum zona lo. It seems clear that she only gets one set of lashes for tuma, according to Rabba, and not because of a zona, because actually she's not a zona. And some of the commentaries say here, he clearly would disagree with Rav Sheshet, because what did Rav Sheshet say, again, to connect things that we're learning today, that if an Esha Yisrael was raped, she would never, going forward in the future, be able to marry a kohen because she falls into the category of a zona. According to this, she wouldn't be. Yes, she was defiled, but she was defiled to her husband, who was a Yisrael, and that's not a defilement that we care about. He's allowed to stay married to her. If he later divorces her or dies, well, if she divorces her, it would be a problem because she couldn't marry a kohen anyway. But if he dies, she can go marry a kohen because she's not considered a zona, and all a kohen can't marry a zona. So many of the commentaries say it's clear he disagrees with that halacha of Rav Sheshet. So now he gets lashes mishum tuma in mishum zona lo. By the way, there's a bet by this, which shows that's the halacha is like this opinion of Rabba, which sits better with us anyway. But honest lo krina bezona. So here you see if she's raped, she's not considered a zona. So now they're going to bring the same contradiction as before. Mativ Rabbi Zera, v'hilo nitpasa asura, ha nitpasa muteret, v'yesh la acheret she'afal pishi nitpasa asura, ve'ezo zo eshet kohen, v'lava b'michlal aseh. How could you say she gets lashes for tuma when it comes from this positively worded statement and not a negative commandment? Amar Rabba, akol hayu bichlal acharei asher hu tamah. Really goes back to this because she was defiled. That's saying she's defiled and there's a lo taseh. Then we excluded the Eshet Kohen, that she's not considered a defilement from rape is not defilement. That's a problem for her. But the Eshet Kohen is already back from where she was in the beginning. We don't actually derive it from this verse, but that's why it's actually a lo taseh, the same way we answered it before. Okay, we're going to finish with the next Mishna and a little bit of a section on that. We're now moving on to Amana the Kohen Gadol, Gurusha v'chalutza the Kohen Idiot mina elusin lo yochlu b'truma. We're still on the topic of truma. Who can eat truma? Who can't? Now we're talking about a different situation. Instead of you married a Kohen and you could eat truma from the first husband, and then the question is, yibum, did it allow eating truma or not? But now we're talking about a woman who came from a family of kohanim. She ate truma all her life. When she gets married to Yisrael, she's no longer allowed to eat truma. Another thing that forbids her from eating truma, even if she marries a kohen, if she marries a kohen who she's not allowed to marry, she's a divorcee who's a bat kohen, she marries a kohen, she's prohibited from eating truma because she did something wrong, right? So she's defiled the kiuna by marrying someone she's not allowed to marry. She can't eat truma. So now, if she's an almanah the kohen gadol, grusha v'chalutza the kohen idiot, even mina erusim, even though they haven't done the forbidden relationship, because they haven't had relations yet with each other, which is really what the Torah forbids. But erusin is enough to forbid her from eating truma. But Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, machshirin, they say, as long as she hasn't slept with him yet, it's not forbidden. Okay, it's only going to be forbidden once she does the isur. Then she becomes psula, disqualified from eating truma. At this point, nothing's really happened, right? Even though erusin is something, it's not enough. Remember, erusin is not engagement that we call engagement. Engagement, halachic engagement. So now, but mina nisuim psulo, nit'almalu or nitgarshu, what if before they, okay, now we're going to have two options. Either they were married or they were only betrothed. And then, right, which is engaged, same thing. And then he dies or divorces her. If it was mina nisuim psulo, they're forever forbidden. If they have been together, she is forever forbidden to marry a kohen. She's forever forbidden from eating truma. She's obviously forbidden from marrying a kohen anyway. She was forbidden in the first place, but she can't ever eat truma again, even though she was the daughter of a kohen. Mina erusim, but if she was only engaged and betrothed to the first husband, right, to the first time, and never actually went through with having a relationship with him, then she can go back to eating truma. So Tanya, the braita says, Amar Rabbi Meir, kavachomer. How do we learn this? Rabbi Meir, who's the Tanakhama's opinion, who says, again, from an erusin, they already can't eat truma. What does he say? It's a kavachomer. It's a weird kavachomer. You'll see the Gemara is going to reject it right away. If she marries a Yisrael, she can't eat truma anymore. So, which is a permitted relationship. A bat kohen can marry anyone she wants. Right here, it's a forbidden relationship. Of course, it's going to forbid her. So Amrulo, he said, what are you talking about? A Yisrael can never permit anyone to eat truma. But Tomar she married a kohen, even though she wasn't allowed to marry a kohen. He can permit her to eat. He can permit other women to eat truma. So you can't compare the two. It's a ridiculous comparison. Last thing for today, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Yeshaya, Ptsua Daka, which is someone you're not allowed to marry. There's someone who has some sexual dysfunction. Kohen, so he's a Ptsua Daka Kohen, Shekidesh Bat Yisrael. Banu lemachlok Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. This isn't a forbidden relationship for a Kohen. This is a forbidden relationship for her, right? She can't marry a Ptsua Daka, whether he's a Kohen or not. So what if she gets betrothed to him? So it's the same machloket. Le Rabbi Meir, the Amal. Now here they're going to call it something else, a term that we didn't use yet. The Gemara uses it to explain our Mishnah. If she's ready for a forbidden sexual relationship, like a Ptsua Daka to Yisrael, to anyone, or like we said before, in Almanad or Kohen Gadol, right? She's waiting for, right? She's on her way to doing a bi'ah psula, basically, you could say, right? A bi'ah that would disqualify her from eating truma. So she already can eat. That was Rabbi Meir. Hanami lo achla. So same thing here. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Mishna le bi'ah psula doraita achla. Hanami achla. They said in the case of the Almanah Kohen Gadol and Grusha, it's only Mishna merit, right? It's all the way you look at it. One is you're on your way to about to do it. The other one says you're only on your way to do it. You haven't done anything. So you can still eat truma. So therefore, the Ptsua Daka, Kidesh Yisrael, right, Abaye kohen, she should still be allowed to eat truma. Right now, we're saying this. Soon, we're going to, on tomorrow's daf, we're going to possibly reject this assumption that it's the same thing. Okay, with that, we'll finish for our daf. Have a great day, everyone. Chodesh Tov.